and one of them shoots an arrow into him for his stubbornness. Potts, now bleeding, panics and grabs his rifle. He fires at one of the warriors, and instantly the Blackfeet return, a storm of arrows that turn his body into a pincushion. Horrified, Coulter can do nothing but stand there and watch as Potts is dragged ashore and hacked to pieces. He assumes he's next, but instead, the chief unexpectedly points to the open prairie and tells him to run. Coulter couldn't believe what was happening. He was being spared, and so he takes off, sprinting butt naked as fast as he could. He gets a few hundred yards away when suddenly, war cries echo out in the distance behind him, and it dawns on him that he had not been set free after all. He was simply given a head start. This was a hunt, and he was their prey. Naked, alone, and now running for his life, Coulter sprints ahead. He knows that about 6 miles away is the Madison River. If he can just make it there, he may have a chance of getting away. Every step drives sharp rocks into his bare feet, and his legs are ripped up by shrubs. But Coulter pushes himself harder than he ever has before. His lungs burning, he keeps running until his vision starts to blur and blood begins pouring from his nose from the sheer strain. After traveling what felt like a few miles, he stops to try to catch his breath and turns to see if he had lost the Indians. To his horror, one warrior had caught up and found him and was now just 20 yards away. Exhausted and knowing he can't outrun the man, he quickly turns to fight. The Indian, who is running at a full clip towards Coulter, is startled when the naked white man suddenly whips around and aggressively raises his arms towards him. He stumbles to the ground and breaks his spear. On instinct, Coulter rushes over, grabs the broken spear, and drives it into the warrior, killing him. The frontiersman takes a blanket that young Blackfoot was carrying, and as a group of warriors draws near, he takes off running again. He reaches the river, bleeding from his feet and nose, barely able to stand. He can hear the natives getting closer behind him. His legs are completely dead, and he begins desperately searching for somewhere to hide. As the voices of the warriors grow louder and louder, Coulter spots a beaver lodge and dives into the icy water. He swims beneath the lodge and finds a small pocket of air just big enough to keep his face above the surface. When the Blackfeet arrive moments later, there is no sign of the naked white man they had been pursuing. They circle the area for hours, and Coulter does his best to remain perfectly still beneath the lodge as the freezing water numbs his entire body. After what seems like an eternity, night falls, and the sounds of the Blackfeet warriors fade into the distance. In near darkness, Coulter slips back into the river and swims a few miles downstream. He crawls ashore, shaking and half frozen, but he is alive. For the next 11 days, with just the blanket he stole from the warrior, he keeps moving through harsh terrain, surviving on roots and berries. He forces his broken body more than 300 miles through mountains and valleys, until finally he reaches a trading fort on the Little Bighorn. As he stumbles in, he is nearly unrecognizable. He's thin, exhausted, and bleeding everywhere. But, against all odds, he lived to tell the tale. Leonid Rogozov. It's September 1960, and a 26-year-old surgeon, Leonid Rogozov, steps off his ship and onto the frozen continent of Antarctica. A few months earlier, the Soviet Union had announced its 6th Antarctic expedition and was looking for a doctor willing to spend 2 years at the Novolazarevskaya station, one of the most remote research stations on Earth. Leonid had been studying to become a surgeon, but when he heard the news, he dropped everything and quickly applied to join the expedition. He's chosen and is assigned to join the 13-man research team as its sole doctor. As Leonid excitedly walks to the station, he can't believe how quickly his life has changed. But he is completely unaware that soon he would be fighting for his life with nothing but a scalpel and a mirror. By January 1961, the station is fully functional, and Leonid settles into his role as the only physician for the crew. For the first few months, everything is going according to plan, and luckily, the researchers seem pretty good at keeping themselves healthy in these extreme conditions. But on the morning of April 29th, Leonid wakes up and something is not right. He feels weak and nauseous. He picks up a scalpel and makes a 4-inch cut on his right side. He continues to cut through layers of muscle and tissue, but he struggles using the mirror to see and eventually begins working through touch alone. He can feel the warmth of his blood seeping out over his hands as he searches for his appendix. As he's working blindly in the hole he had cut into himself, he accidentally cuts his large intestine. Leonid quickly calls for sutures, and he's forced to sew it back together before he can continue to his appendix. 40 minutes have now passed, and his vision begins to blur. His head starts to spin, and he becomes nauseous. He begins to take short 30-second breaks every 4 minutes to regain his focus, using all of his concentration to not black out mid-surgery. After almost an hour of cutting and feeling around his abdomen, Leonid finally locates his appendix. But at that exact moment, he feels his heart rate slow, and his hands begin to lose sensation. He battles back through the brink of blacking out, grips his scalpel, and quickly removes his appendix. As he inspects it, he sees a dark stain at its base and deduces that if it was not removed, it would have burst within a day. He fights through the vertigo and nausea and sews himself back together. Nearly 2 hours after he had made the initial cut into himself, the surgery was completed, and Leonid, exhausted both mentally and physically, collapses on the table. Over the next few days, he continues to suffer from a high fever, and his colleagues worry that their doctor still won't make it. But on day 5, his fever finally breaks, and in 2 weeks, Leonid is back on his feet performing his regular duties. Operating on yourself and then continuing to do your job as if nothing had happened is, not gonna lie, kind of impressive. And I guess even the Soviet government thought so too, as Leonid was later awarded the Order of the Red Banner of Labor for his bravery and service to the Soviet state. Julianne Kopka. It's December 24th, She was unconscious while it happened, but the rainforest canopy and the airplane seats she was strapped into had broken her fall, just enough to keep her from dying on impact. Somehow, she is still alive. She immediately calls out for her mother, but nobody answers. As she tries to stand, her head begins to spin from a brutal concussion. She stumbles through the wreckage, desperately searching for other passengers, but she is completely alone. As she checks herself, she realizes her collarbone is broken. She also has a deep gash along her right arm, a badly wounded knee, and an injured eye. To make matters worse, she's lost her glasses, and being short-sighted meant she was now nearly blind to the dangers lurking around her in the rainforest. But there was one thing that Julianne had that perhaps no one else who may have survived the crash had. During the 18 months she lived with her parents in the Amazon before high school, she learned the basics of how to survive in the jungle. She remembered that the best chance of survival in a situation like this was to find a river, because if she followed it long enough, it would eventually lead her to people. As she moves through the scattered wreckage, she finds a bag of sweets. With that as her only food, Julianne pushes forward through the thick jungle. For days, she hobbled through the rainforest alone, the calls of the animals around her providing an eerie soundtrack to her hike of desperation. At night, the cold winds leave her shivering as she curls up in a bush to try to sleep. As the days pass, the wound on her arm becomes infected, and botfly maggots start eating into her open flesh. On the 4th day, she finds a stream and begins to follow it. As she turns a corner, she sees something that sends shivers down her spine. In front of her are 3 dead passengers from her flight, all still strapped to their seats with their heads buried into the ground. It's the first time Julianne had ever seen a dead body, and she is initially frozen in fear. She works up the courage to approach the bodies to check the woman, dreading the idea that this could be her mom, but finds that the corpse's toenails are painted, something her mother never did. Staring at the passengers, the last bits of hope she was holding onto begin to slip away. She gathers herself and forces onward. The sound of moving water grows louder, and the creek suddenly opens into a wide river. She knows that if she continues to walk along the river, she could maybe find her way out. But after 10 days of stumbling through the forest, she is reaching her limit. Her bag of sweets ran out days ago, and now she was so weak she could barely stand. Just as she is about to give up, she spots a small boat tied to the riverbank. Using the last of her energy, she makes her way to the boat. She notices a narrow path leading into the trees, and it takes her to a small hut. She's saved! But when she gets there, no one is there. By now, the maggots in her arm were nearly 1 inch long. She remembered something her father did for one of their pets in the past, and she finds a can of gasoline in the hut. She sucks the gas out of the can and spits it onto her wound. The pain is excruciating as the maggots try to burrow deeper into the wound to escape the fuel, but she is able to pluck 30 of them out of her arm. Exhausted, Julianne falls to the ground inside the hut and falls asleep. The next morning, she wakes to the sound of voices and runs outside. When the men see Julianne, they are terrified and initially think she's a half-dolphin water goddess. But speaking in Spanish, she explains to them what happened. She was on the flight that crashed and she is all alone. They treat her wounds, feed her, and the next day bring her back to civilization. Julianne is soon reunited with her father and learns that her mother is still missing. Officials continue to search for her mother, but her body is eventually found in January. She had also survived the plane crash, but was too injured to move and died a few days after the incident in the jungle.